Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. We're back with the Reb and Rob Show. Bobby Charles, welcome, and thank you for being with me.
That's great to be here, Rebecca. Always have a fun time on this show.
Absolutely. Bobby, you have spent time in all three branches of the federal government, two White Houses, Congress doing oversight and judiciary as a U.S. Court of Appeals clerk. Yet today, Bobby, they seem to all be in trouble. The three branches of government not really respecting separation of powers, and our judicial system seems to be misused to settle political scores. No action by the Attorney General against the sitting president for what looks like criminal activity. And now the family, church, and schools all are under pressure. If there were ever a time of constitutional testing or multiple constitutional crises, it seems like we're living in it. Are we in a time of constitutional crisis? And if so, where do you see all of this going?
You know, you've really put your finger, Rebecca, on what probably is troubling most people today. The notion that we have these overlapping institutional attacks or attacks on institutions that we believe are terribly important to the nation. So, starting at the individual level for a moment, you think about our Bill of Rights, and we have rights in our First Amendment, our Second Amendment. People don't often look at things like the Fourth Amendment, but that's what keeps you secure in your home and your papers. The Fifth Amendment gives us due process at the federal level, and that gets carried down to the state level with the 14th Amendment. And the Sixth Amendment, very important for fair trial. Ninth and 10th, which say that, hey, the federal government is limited. They can't do certain things if they're not in the Constitution or otherwise directed. And so the individual's rights are personally under fire today. The family's rights are clearly under fire today. I mean, every single day you look at parents being yet again, hit by leftists on school boards, administrators, people being, telling them that they don't have the right to raise their own children. Of course, they have the right to raise their own children. We've always had that right. And those prerogatives can't be taken away by the state. You've got the church, and both the United States and Canada right now, the Christian church in particular, but frankly also synagogues and mosques. These are sometimes some people of faith share conservative values, and these conservative values are under attack to such a degree that they're trying to take away, and we saw it during COVID, take away the rights of people to worship without persecution. And this is also true again in the schools, by the way. People forget that kids have a right to pray in school if they so wish. So, here are these institutions that are sort of at the lower level. And then we do have several states, a number of states that are under fire. I'll just say that the state that I come from, Maine, just did two things that I think are really stunning and stunningly bad for both the state and as an example to the nation. One is they allowed abortion up to birth, and I really think that's absurd. It's infanticide. All of us have been in that moment, actually, in this exact in this world, and to get that point is really horrific. And then the other thing they did is they've pushed ranked choice voting, and they also just pushed euthanasia, which is to say that the institutions of family and of faith and are also under fire from state governments. But the biggest constitutional crises, and the ones that I think you're pointing to, are we have one that relates to Joe Biden and the expanding, even today, more data showing a criminal enterprise of enormous breadth and depth, clearly intentional. The centerpiece of it is Joe Biden, who's a sitting president. We've never seen a scandal of this kind, a constitutional crisis of this kind, and it continues to get bigger. And then you have the other side of that, which is a kind of a different freight train coming at that one. And that is Donald Trump, a former president who's facing really what appear to me to be spacious indictments, clearly, transparently political. And of course, the American people are not stupid. They see this. They see the crime on the side of the Biden family, and they see the injustices that are being interposed on his leading political candidate. And honestly, I think they're disappointed in their justice system. And I think they do recognize that these are constitutional crises.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about the breakdown of assault on our institutions, our individual rights, the family, faith, schools, our government institutions. But I do want to pull on that last thread a bit more. The idea that we're looking at two big freight trains headed toward each other, the idea that we have a former and possibly future president being prosecuted, and some would say persecuted by misuse of laws in the Justice Department, And then we have evidence building by the week that shows seemingly serious criminal behavior by the sitting president, Joe Biden, and his family. Aren't these each a serious constitutional crisis?
They are flip sides, ironically, of a constitutional moment that the nation has never seen before. Let's take the Trump piece first. You have these two New York indictments that literally are brought by prosecutors who are elected to office and who ran on the platform that they would find some reason to indict the former president. They don't like him. They didn't like his policies. He was clearly very conservative in the way that he managed the country economically, morally, internationally. They didn't like that. So these are transparently political. And I think, frankly, the one brought by Mr. Bragg up in New York is getting chopped up by the day, and judges are even partisan judges can't square it with their own legal training, and so they're saying no, pieces of that aren't going to fly. And then you have two sets of indictments brought at the federal level, again unprecedented. We've never had a president that has been persecuted, a good word, in this way, a former president by his opponent, and so what do you see? The first set were based on classified documents, again brought by this guy Jack Smith, who is a prosecutor appointed by Merrick Garland. Of course, Merrick Garland I like to think of him as a bitter old man. He wanted to be on the Supreme Court. The Republicans didn't let him get there. And now he seems to be making it his mission to bring down as many Republicans and to have as much impact as he can as an attorney general. But the interesting part is he's playing a dual role. He's appointed this prosecutor, Jack Smith. Who's Jack Smith? Jack Smith is the only prosecutor alive today who has been unanimously effectively censured by the Supreme Court, 9-0, for having brought an overbroad indictment against a Republican actor, former governor of Virginia, Bob McConnell. If you read that opinion, and I've read it twice now in the last week, you look at that opinion and you see that it really matches this indictment. It basically is a replay of an overbroad indictment, both of Jack Smith's indictments. The first one has to do with holding classified documents. We won't even get into the fact that Joe Biden held more classified documents by a magnitude than Mr. Trump did, President Trump did. But it's also true that this first indictment is flawed, and probably the evidence will get thrown out, or at least parts of it will, because it was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. We have a thing called the exclusionary rule that says that a judge can throw evidence out if it was illegally brought. So that we've never seen the full text of the warrant. That had to be specific. It has to say exactly what you're looking for, exactly where you're going to find it, or it's a general warrant, and a general warrant is illegal under the Fourth Amendment. So that case is highly questionable, and nobody, for an administrative purpose, Rebecca, no one has ever brought a criminal action, tried to federalize it, and try to put a former president, in jail. In fact, before Jimmy Carter, and including Jimmy Carter, presidents were allowed to bring home anything they wanted, to write their books, to defend themselves against accusations, etc. So it's really an administrative act, and it's been turned into a felony. The other one is even more outrageous. It's 4 counts. And we have writing up on AMAC.us, and we'll have more. It's 4 counts that are really dedicated to the idea of pretending that the president has defrauded the country because of the speech that he gave on January 6th. Well, the interesting part is the most difficult part for them to prove, and they would have to prove it to win any of those counts, is that the president did not sincerely believe that there were voting irregularities in 6 of these, or in any, but he argued that there were in 6 outstanding states. Interestingly, those 6 states, which would have turned the election, did have objective irregularities in them. They were still being sorted out. In the old days, we would have somebody elected in November. They would be inaugurated in March. Well, we inaugurate now on January 20th, and that puts a very fast timeline on anybody that's going to object to the procedures that have occurred in an election. But, I think people need to put a time out sign up and just think for a minute about that election. That was the first time, and we know this all in our hearts. That was the first time that you had things like vote harvesting and absentee ballots for no reason, and voting both before and after Election Day, and voting in multiple precincts, all these things that had changed because of COVID. right? So there was a reasonable sense that people had that there might be irregularities in this election, which did show up in virtually all the states in one form or another. Some states had genuine fraud, some did not. Was there enough to ever tip the election? That's what a lot of these adjudicated proceedings were supposed to determine. And the president, obviously, despite the fact that even if you count the ballots all up and he lost, at that moment in time, there was an opportunity to say, and a right to say, look, we need to protest uh, just the process. It doesn't mean you're advocating criminality. It doesn't mean that what it means is you're exercising free speech. And the funny part about it is that I think you look back over time, and if they're going to criminalize a speech that he gave that day, in which incidentally he also cautioned people not to be violent, if you're going to criminalize that speech because a couple of 100,000 people came and a couple of hundred behaved badly, then you've criminalized all future political speeches. Because you could pick speeches that Schumer has given and Pelosi has given in 2020, and riots occurred in these various cities. If you really want to make the proximate cause of a riot a political speech and then criminalize the political speech, you've lost the right of speech in this country. So that's why those are not going to hold up. There are other provisions in the indictment that really don't make a lot of sense, and I won't go into them, but people can read them on amac.us. And I think what we're up against in that case is really a sad moment, because it looks like our judicial process has been twisted to be political. And on the Biden side, I'll just close up and say we have more and more documents every day. They do indicate that an impeachment, I think, is appropriate. And you have a cover-up beginning to emerge when you see that the head of the FBI, the Attorney General of the United States, and the head of the IRS all seem to be stating things publicly that are at direct odds with the documents that are emerging from the Treasury Department, showing that as vice president, Joe Biden was part of a process by which 17 accounts got set up by his son. Meetings were coordinated. Monies, apparently $20 million, was paid into these accounts, often below the level that a banking regulator would pick it up. It certainly looks like a violation of 18 U.S.C. 201, which is a federal bribery statute, and it also looks like a RICO violation. So you're absolutely right, Rebecca. We have two freight trains coming at each other, two constitutional crises, and it's not a good look for America.
Yeah. On the Biden front, that criminality cannot be left unchecked. But, what they're doing to Trump, I am concerned that this all really does look like election interference and that we're seeing a kind of third world problem emerge, the preemptive throwing of the election. If they're trying to upset the electoral process, even before we have an election, take the front runner out by putting him in prison, what do we do about that? Is that too harsh, or could this really happen?
You know, Rebecca, that's a question many Americans are asking, and it's an almost unthinkable. Imagine an unthinkable thing to have a leading Republican candidate end up in prison on a spurious charge that makes no sense whatsoever. It's essentially a trumped up charge. And so the sad part about this is that it puts us in a position. The short answer to your question is yes, it could happen. If that happens, Katie, bar the door. I mean, I really hope and pray it doesn't happen, because I don't want to see violence in this country. That would do a lot of harm to all of our institutions. I don't want to see the kind of, obviously, if he were elected and he were in prison, I suppose he could pardon himself and then get back to work again. But it's a sad, sad turn of events. And you say third world, you're absolutely right. I mean, you think about political leaders. The president of Russia, Putin, has prosecuted, and put his chief political opponent in prison. That's, of course, what they did to people like Nelson Mandela. That's what all over the world, opposition candidates get nobbled by those that are in power, particularly one-party power. So it's a very dangerous moment for the republic. There are a couple of historical precedents, but it's a very dangerous. The one historical precedent that comes to my mind. Well, I'll just say they're historical precedents, and I'll leave it at that. But in 1876, there was an election that ended up getting resolved appropriately, but not without near violence and a near second civil war. So these are serious issues.
They most certainly are. Bobby, before we let you run today, and by the way, for everyone listening, please check out amac.us because we are tracking these stories closely. We've got a ton of writers behind the scenes that are watching what's happening, Bobby Charles being one of them, and keeping you updated in news. So download the new AMAC News app if you haven't done so. But we are tracking both these indictments against Trump and as we learn more and more each week what's happening with the Biden family and Joe Biden himself. But Bobby, before we let you run, maybe in closing, you could tell us a story that speaks to America's leadership, America's hard decisions, and really reminds us of our strengths. Everyone looks
Yeah.
for positivity.
Yeah, I will. Let me pause on that for a second and just it dawns on me that it's valuable to just take one additional second on your prior question, which is the significance of this constitutional crisis. Short version is Joe Biden is behaving in a way that presents real possibilities of an impeachment, and I think we need to recognize that that would be very divisive in this country. At the same time, it could be very significant. President Trump is doing what Sam Tilden did not do in 1876, and that's the candidate you've never heard of. Nobody's ever heard of Sam Tilden. And the irony is that Sam Tilden actually won the election of 1876, 184 electors to 165. And behind the scenes, there was election corruption going on in 4 states, 3 of them in the South. And behind the scenes, they wangled and turned it around and came to the conclusion that a guy named Rutherford B. Hayes, at that time the Republican, had actually won 185 to 184. Sam Tilden could have blown a fuse. Hayes could have decided to sue him later and prevent him from running again. None of that happened. We don't do that in this country. And so the reason this is a constitutional crisis, just for what it's worth, is that we've never seen this level of venality and criminality, I think, in a White House. So I'll leave it there. In terms of an event, it happens that today is the 9th of August. And interestingly, this is the 78th anniversary of really the act that truly ended the Second World War. And that was a decision by a Democrat president who would probably be a Republican today, Harry Truman, who dropped the second nuclear bomb on Nagasaki. And people can describe that as a terrible event, but I will tell you that it brought the war to a quick close. It was the second drop. It probably saved millions of Japanese lives. At the same time, it took lives. It also saved at least 1 million American lives because we had a flotilla already headed from Okinawa to mainland Japan. And I'll tell you the reason it's interesting to bring that particular fact up is that we are a country to whom the rest of the world looks for the preservation of peace. And when a war breaks out, we're kind of the white knight that rides in, and we did that in World War I and World War II, and we very often have played that role. I think that the thing we have to remember is that we've been through bad times before. Those were times when freedom was being attacked abroad, but these same freedoms that we love can be attacked at home. And I think the thing we have to do is take heart from one another, that these are timeless freedoms. All of those things, to bring it back to the top of the hour here, all of those freedoms we talked about for the individual, the family, the school, the church, and ultimately a limited federal government, they're timeless. They're as true today as they've ever been. And I hope 1,000 years from now, they're just as true because they're God-given freedoms. And I think we just have to think that way because it's easy to get down. But I think if you think about the long pattern of history, in the end, America has proved itself a leader, both at home and abroad. And I'm sure that our generation can be equal to the time.
Oh, Bobby, thank you so much. We certainly need to defend freedom whenever it is under fire, including at home. Thank you, Robert Charles, and to all of our members for tuning in. We thank you so much because so many of our members are doing exactly that, defending freedom. Bobby, thanks again for being with me today.
A real pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can listen to more just like it. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, or by downloading the AMAC app. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. Have a wonderful evening.